Hutch.on.Film, thank you very, very much for coming on Just Get a Real Job. I'm, of course, Jamie McKinley, the host of this podcast, if anyone is listening for the first time. But how's it going? Thank you for coming on this on a Monday afternoon. Much appreciated.
Thank you. On a cold and dreary Monday afternoon as we come into the winter months. Yeah, a bit grim, but what a lovely sunny conversation to have about the film and TV industry.
I'm sure.
Maybe not sunny. Okay. It could be. It could be. We'll talk about how it could be.
It's a very positive and upbeat time at the moment. You totally didn't post a video yesterday about the trouble that the UK TV industry is in at the moment. But Hutch, just for the purpose of this, you're a filmmaker, you're an exec, you run quite a big online film community now. You've been posting quite regularly with TikTok, Instagram, across social media, really using that to create a brand for yourself. It's really interesting. I just met you through TikTok and from starting to post more regularly on it, and you very kindly shared one of my videos recently, which is greatly appreciated as well. But just for our listeners, do you want to introduce yourself? There's lots I'm quite excited to ask you about today.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Hutch. Handle on Instagram and TikTok is Hutch.on.Film. I've been in production for like 15, since I was 20, right? And I'm nearly 40. So 15, 20, coming up on 20 years. And very much started, I imagine like everybody does, I bought a camera and I started filming my friends who are musicians, right? That was kind of how I got into this space. And then went through a period of like working on sort of higher end commercials and music videos and that kind of stuff in and around London, and took the opportunity to kind of use the platform that I'd built there to pivot back into indie film. And then more recently, I worked with an American company who was spending a fair amount of money on film and TV programs as a producer, head of production, executive producer, and I worked on tens of millions of dollars worth of indie films. Got to network and kind of talk to some of the higher echelons of Hollywood, which was really, really interesting in seeing how the problems in that level of the industry mirrored those that I had been going through with indie film, right? Like it was staggering. But amongst that group of projects include RZR, which I was an executive producer for, which was nominated for an Emmy in 2024.
Wow. So quite an interesting change of worlds, going from starting out filming friends' music videos and then suddenly finding yourself in the more Hollywood world. How did that actually happen? How did you suddenly, those bridges sort of cross over?
Well, it was a really interesting company that I met. Because they were a gaming company and they were trying to move into content. And in the big content boom, right, there was this post-COVID, there was this enormous demand for content, which kind of drew people into the industry. And I think, I was definitely on a track where I'd worked on some big TV commercials, I'd worked on some big brand campaigns, and I'd worked on a load of indie films, but I definitely skipped a couple of rungs in that ladder and was kind of brought on board into a company that was just going 100 miles an hour. And when you're in a company like that and you just keep up, you just get more and more workload. So, I kind of joined knowing that I would be doing some TV focused production, and then ended up essentially running the entire slate of films and working across that. So there was that content drought. There was a bit of luck. There was being in the right place at the right time. And then there was also just knowing the tricks of production, right? Because getting a production made and pitching a production in the first place, they're two very different things. And understanding, one of the things that I think the company I was working for found most useful about me is that I could very quickly break down, was this a production that they were trying to do bare bones, scrappy? Is this the minimum we could do it for? Or have they inflated this? Have they got a couple of extra PA? Where are they hiding money in those budgets? And so that was kind of, I would go in and be like, okay, if I was doing this, I would need X, Y, Z, and kind of go from that perspective. But yeah, I think it was just being around in that indie space, but also having a background of quite high-end productions on TV commercials and whatnot. I was able to kind of put those two together when they were looking for somebody. Yeah, just, when you get into a company and you just start running and people find out that you're useful, you just get more and more responsibility, I think.
No, definitely. This podcast is, a lot of our listeners are emerging creatives in various spaces. A lot of them want to work in film and TV, and some of them are currently working in that space. Just to sort of backtrack slightly, to how you got started out, and you're talking about working on commercials and stuff, what sort of roles were you doing in the build up to that? Were you a PA? Were you shooting? Were you a director? Or are you sort of a producer as well, or kind of all of them combined?
Sort of. the way I like to talk about industry careers is one of two tracks, right? You're either going in for the industry track where you're trying to get on set as a runner or, a PA, and then you kind of work your way up in that space. And then there is the other category, right? Which is, you're going out and doing it yourself, right? You're shooting independent films, you're shooting short films, you're shooting anything with your friends, right? And I have very much, apart from my one brief stint where I went into the industry side of things, I've mostly been in this space, right? I remember this was probably 2011, 2012, and I remember watching a load of content that was starting to appear on YouTube, which just looked beautiful, right? There was Blogotech was a really interesting channel that was filming musicians, and the work that they had just looked beautifully cinematic. And when I found out that that was shot on a DSLR, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And so I bought at the time, the good camera was the Canon 5D Mark II, and it would shoot 1080 video, and it looked beautiful, right? It looked cinematic if you had the right lenses on it. And I just started shooting my friends, right? I was in Brighton at music university, and all of my friends were musicians. I was like, oh, I could do live sessions like La Blogotech. And so I did. I just started shooting and uploading those things. And then, I think at the beginning, I sort of fancied myself as a director, maybe a director of photography, right? That's the route I was going down. But nobody would pay me to do that. But lots of people wanted me to pay me to organize things, right? And showing that you can do something in a show reel is a really good way of going in and being like, no, I've done that before, right? There's that old adage in the TV that no one pays you for something you haven't already done. And so because I had already done those things, I could then get work doing them. I don't take £100 jobs, £250 jobs, and did a couple of years of that, shooting photos, shooting video, this kind of blend of stuff, mostly around musicians. And then the jobs just started getting a bit bigger, right? You'd get a client who bring you in for a very basic first job, and then they'd be like, oh, could you actually shoot this as well? And you'd step up a little bit and step up. And that was kind of, I lived in this freelance world, just taking basically anything. I think my speciality was making things look very high end with like a crew of 2, and just kind of going through that. And then being around London and getting in with the right marketing companies, the right other production companies, just kind of led to a whole lot of work where, we were doing TV campaigns for PlayStation, and like we did this big campaign for Google. And yeah, just I never, at no point did I really know that there was a way to get into the TV and film industry. And I wasn't even really thinking about it, if I'm perfectly honest. I was just kind of like, I have this skill, I have this camera, and I'm going to use that to make money. And it wasn't until, obviously I've loved film from a young age, and I knew, the idea of working in the film industry was a dream. But then I started getting approached, because of the work that I've been doing in London, I started getting approached by people who are making short films. And I think at that point in my career, I was earning enough that going back and sort of trying the industry route into film and TV was not appealing to me. I'd sort of like, I was making enough money to be like, no, I should keep doing this, but maybe I go in as, or maybe I reposition myself as a director. Maybe I start making my own short films. And it was kind of around, 2019, just before the lockdown, that I did the most of that kind of work, where I was working on my own projects. I was working with little project teams that were doing stuff, and we were mostly producing and shooting these things. But this is kind of something that I'm constantly talking to people who are like in the industry, right? Hardcore, have been in the industry since being a runner. Like, you can step out of that. You can go and make things, right? And making a short film makes you a better runner. It makes you a better PA. It makes you a better everything. It might be the thing that gets you that little extra jump. Again, I spend a lot of time on the internet talking about how bad the situation is in film and TV, which I don't want to gloss over. I don't know that there's a perfect solution. I don't know that there's a perfect thing to do to get into the industry, but my personal experience and my anecdotal experience can tell you that being the driving force behind anything else suddenly makes the chances of your project being made so much higher, because you're the person who's going to deliver it. And whatever you're doing, whether you're shooting a short film or whether you're shooting music videos or whether you're making a podcast, all of that can tie into a sort of blended future career in film and TV. And I think it's the smart play to kind of make sure that you're putting that stuff out on social media, make sure that you're being visible, make sure that you are pushing yourself into the areas that you want to work and gaining that experience for yourself. And then, when you're in the industry, like show it off. Show your boss what you did at the weekend. Show your boss the thing that you shot. Those conversations can be really fruitful if done in the right way.
Yeah, and I suppose it makes you stand out as well, because there's so much to unpack from that answer and so much I want to chat to you about. But I suppose one thing is that talk about those sort of I know it's blended in this day and age, and it's almost hard to articulate, but like that sort of more traditional industry route and that doing it yourself route. And I'm very much in the first, where I've like had a more chronological career, where I started as a runner. I in fact worked in COVID. I was a COVID assistant. That's how I got my break in TV. I was like handing out masks and doing all that stuff. And then I've become a script editor. I worked my way up that sort of route. Obviously, I do this podcast on the side, which again, to add to what you're saying, I think doing another project takes you so far, because like even from the point of view, whereas like the access this gives me to speak to people like yourself, like a network with it, and it's also an interview. It's not just that, but you know what I mean? It gives you that sort of extra opportunity, but it also just shows that you're very proactive, that you can do, you learn other skills from it. So I do think there is a massive value to that. But I suppose my question for you out of that is, do you still find there's like a snobbery and a kind of gate-kept attitude on the industry? Because I think a lot of people, and I've been in development, I've worked in that space, are quite suspicious of people that have done it themselves. There's a real suspicion there.
Yeah. It's how should I tiptoe around this? I think there's, I certainly have felt that there is a snobbery around TV stuff, right, and film stuff. I think it's different, right? Because the thing that I'm also trying to separate in my head is that like the US market and the UK market are super different, right? In the US, if you've broken into the industry because you've made something amazing, you are a hero, right? That you are lauded as somebody who beat the system, who went out there and showed them who's boss. I don't know. I'm trying to verbalize that. In the UK, there's still very much a suspicion, although that is disappearing. And certainly, I find myself over the last year, because I sit on this kind of intersection of like, I've done some more traditional looking film and TV stuff, but also I come from this social background. I obviously have built my audience because I got sick of telling companies that they should be building an audience, and also not having them not be able to fully deliver on that, right? Like there is building an audience, and then there is this whole other ethos that you have to get into about sharing value, working out how to bring people along for the ride, which companies don't want to do, right? They want to have all of the benefits for themselves. And that is a less good position to start from when you're talking about building affinity with your audience or talking about building a social media presence. And there's less of a snobbery now, I think, because the UK industry is just suffering so hard. Withdrawal of budgets kind of across the board. But B, there's this new change that's happened certainly in the commissioning world, where if you're talking to the channels, then now the commissioners are sort of saying, well, we probably need to see this have some traction on social media before we invest in it. And that, for me, going through that experience at the beginning, before I was making social media content, starting to pitch my own project, starting to prepare myself for my own slate, and starting to prepare to move into this world where I was going to run my company, my production company. The moment I heard that from channels, I was like, they've lost the game. That is the biggest strategic error that I have ever heard from, an incumbent power in an industry, right? Because when you think about the way that TV shows are produced for, the thing that the channel provides is the audience, right? That's the power that they have. Of course, they provide the funding, and production companies are working on a cost plus 10% model. So there's money to be made if you can sell something. But if you then need to build the audience yourself, there is a cost associated with that. And certainly the companies that I've been talking to who are really starting to push away from that model, like one company said to me in a meeting this year, "Are we crazy to continue pitching the BBC?" And I was like, maybe. Like, if you're the person who has to build the audience, building an audience online and building a strong community around what you're doing is not a free exercise. It costs money. And so And it costs more money than most people are willing to put into something without the guarantee of a return. You have to find a way to deliver your project out in a kind of minimum viable product way and monetize it so that you can continue this kind of growth phase. And by the time you've done that, you actually don't need the channel, right? Because if you sell it to a channel, you lose any upside, right? You lose any potential upside. But if you keep it yourself, you actually might make this something that your company can live on. You become a media company rather than a production company. So the moment I heard that, I was like, this is the way things are going. That route is not a good one for monetization. Because even when you do sell something to, a channel, when you take into account the number of people that need to watch it for you to get that commission or to get a recommission, and you consider the percentage that you take off the top, the numbers are very similar to YouTube, right? They get scarily similar, and you're like, huh. So if I need 8 million people to watch this thing per episode, and I get this much, so that works out per person. Oh, it's very similar to YouTube. But obviously you have that barrier of entry that the channel will help you get over to produce the thing. And so at that moment, I was like, there's no point in me starting a production company because I don't have the history, right? There are people who are pitching things that have been in the UK industry for 30 years. So I don't have those kinds of connections. Have mostly worked in a kind of blended UK US market. For most of our projects, they were international. So certainly my executive production roles are way more US centric than they are UK. So that's another mark my name. So this was the obvious route. And then the snobbery kind of continued, right? There are regular messages in my inbox from people that I know and I've met at industry events who are like, this is crazy. What are you doing? You can't talk about the industry like this on stuff. You're going to ruin your career. And then I go back and I think, well, my career would have been me fighting against everybody else for commissions, or there is this other way where we can actually talk and actually help indie filmmakers with this very early stage understanding of making a project go viral and building a project online does not look like most people think it looks. It's not a big spike and suddenly everything's viral. It is a slow build. You need to know how to monetize. You need to know how to refunnel that money back into your project, and you need to grow over 2.5 years. So if I can take people on that journey and kind of build a bit more of an indie ecosystem, that feels way more fun than, just the industry rat race.
But surely that will support the mainstream industry as well, because we're at the moment, we both made lots of videos and I made lots of podcasts about this, but the ecosystem's collapsing in the UK industry at the moment because the loss of lower budget shows, soaps like the one I'm about to, I'm working on the moment, it's about to shut down. Like when we lose that, we're going to have to be hemorrhaging so much talent, which then affects, in 5-10 years, even the big streamers like Netflix and Apple won't have as much talent to help make the shows. So we do need an ecosystem there, whether that be an indie filmmaker one or lower budget thing. So I'd like to think that the mainstream channels will see that opportunity and come in and try and do the same anyway. But who knows?
And while I would love to share that optimism, I don't think they will. I think what will actually happen is there will be a new class of commissioner. I think what will happen is media companies, and we're starting to see this a little bit. There are some really interesting media companies in London, right? Lad Bible are a really interesting one. Jungle Creations, Flight Story, those kinds of places. Obviously, they're very focused on digital first content, but there is a space where if you are making for a primetime BBC show about as much as you make on YouTube, then there will be creators who make YouTube shows that are dramas, that are comedies. They will make all of those shows will go somewhere else, and they will go to the place that is willing to build the social infrastructure around them. And at the moment, from the conversations I've had with the UK industry, I don't think the channels are there yet. They don't understand what they lost, right? In the 90s, in the 80s and the 90s, when you were bored, you put the TV on. You knew what was coming out on the BBC because you were already watching the BBC. So yes, they were a delivery platform for the shows, but they were discovery as well. You found out what was going on those channels. And now that has, you can argue about what the split is, but that has gone to social, right? People are, even during TV shows, looking at their phone, right? And so discovery is going to happen in that place. And again, this was part of this kind of all these puzzle pieces kind of locking into place for me when I left Gala was, well, if I'm doing, that's what I'm building my channel for. yes, there is a place where I want to talk to independent filmmakers. Yes, there is a place where I want to provide them the three things that they need to be independent filmmakers, which are community and networking, which is the Film Insider community. Then there's funding, which is coming through an investment vehicle that I'm building alongside all of this. And then there's delivery, which is a platform that I'm building. So with all those three things, that's everything an indie filmmaker needs to kind of create their own space. And that's why I'm saying to all of these people now, like, build your social media. Like, that is the power that you'll have over the next 10 years. If you've built a social media space where you can talk to people and you can involve them in what you're doing and build affinity, that's what the channels are not willing to do. And part of the reason that they're not willing to do it is because they don't understand it, right? Like, the people who are of the age group that really understand social are not yet in positions of enough power to execute a strategy like that. But also, it's expensive. Like, I had somebody approach me the other day and they were like, "We love what you're doing for yourself. Can you come and do that for us?" And I was like, "Yes, this is how much it would cost you." And they were like, "Ooh." And I was like, "Well, there you go. What you obviously will work for free for yourself because you're building something that will be worth money to you in the future." And again, this is a real problem in film and TV, that it is mostly controlled by people who are counting dollars, right? They're thinking about immediate returns. They're thinking about returns within 6 months, within 1 year. But if you extend your time horizon out, because I don't know about you, but like, I'm going to be making films for the next 10 years regardless. Like, I might as well make content about it. So that's the kind of shift that I think gives independence in this space such an edge over this industry. And that's where I would I think the place for those shows is not on the channels. I don't think the channels necessarily represent what they used to. They're certainly, the BBC's having a lot of trouble at the moment being a public service broadcaster. But like, I think there is a space where smart social creators are becoming commissioners. And part of that is a real shift in what we understand to be quality, because you don't need to be making TV level stuff for YouTube. But when you get up to those levels, making TV level stuff for YouTube is actually quite profitable. I don't recommend YouTube as a monetization strategy, heads up, but I would go a different route. But for the people who are really interested in building that, the audience is power. It's what gave BBC power. It's what gave Channel 4 power. And it's the thing that they're losing in that discovery phase, because they don't exist in any real sense where people are looking at content.
Really interesting stuff there. Again, there's always lots to unpack in your answer, so I'm like, I don't know where to take this conversation. I think I'll come back to the online thing, because I'd love to ask, and I think a lot of our listeners listening will be like, okay, I kind of understand a lot of what Hutch is saying, but like, how can I use social media myself if I'm a filmmaker, or if I want to have a creative career, or whatever. So I'll come back to that. But what I kind of want to follow on right now from this part of the conversation is, what do you think the future is going to look like then in 5 years for the TV and film industry in the UK and sort of worldwide? Do you think we'll still have, I think we'll probably will still have like the channels and, shows like Blue Lights or Line of Duty, or whatever that might be, and there'll still be an audience for them, but do you think it'll become more fragmented and people will be more, everyone will have a bubble like we sort of do with Spotify and music, really?
The fragmentation has already happened. That is a product of the last 5 years. And this is what makes marketing for the industry so complicated, right? And it's probably worth talking about, like, what was the dominant thing beforehand, because we've gone through these different phases of marketing. Let's take ourselves back to like 2015. Between 2015 and maybe 2020, the dominant way to market something effectively and for the cheapest way was on social, but it was paid. That was like, and again, you look at the people who really lead in that space, right? VCs are the places where, if you have essentially unlimited cash, that's where you go to growth hack. Like, what's the quickest way to grow a company? What's the quickest way to grow anything? They were leaning heavily into paid spend, right? They were just putting stuff out. And part of that reason was because the major advertisers hadn't really worked out that social was an amazing place to spend money. And so CPMs were really cheap, which is the cost of impressions. So just buying ad space in front of people, you could just, for not very much money, you could target a single video out to 10 million people. And then you could take everybody that watched that and take them through a series of other videos. And by the time they got to the end of that, you'd hit your 7 touch points. They felt affinity with the brand and they would make a purchase. And purchases were not expensive. That's shifted, and purchases are quite expensive now. And what we're seeing is VCs, they're shifting from paid strategy into organic social around a personal brand. Because that is the way, and I certainly think this for the next 10 years is going to be the dominant way to show up. And there's a technical reason for that, right? Part of that is me and my wife used to have exactly the same algorithm, right? I used to show her a post that I saw and she'd be like, oh yeah, I saw that. Oh yeah, I saw it, right. Because we followed the same news sources. We knew the same people. We were in the same world. The new algorithms have gotten so granular on our interests, and they're targeting us based on our attention to different types of things, that her feed now and my feed look completely different. And when we send each other stuff, it's genuinely outside of our little bubbles that we're in, and that's happened to everybody. We are now in these kind of sub niches because of what we actually pay attention to rather than what we're fed. And that makes marketing a real challenge, because I can't, if I have a film out in a couple of weeks, I can't just push my trailer out to everybody, because when was the last time you watched a trailer on TikTok? Like that, you have to be in the trailer algorithm to really get served them. And then when you're served one outside of that interest, you see that it's an ad immediately, and bloop, and off you go. You're on to the next thing, right? There's a skip button. And so you can't just pay to have people watch the trailer and have them convert into sales. What you need to do is you need to show up in their feed in a way that is disguised, not to hide the fact that it's an ad, but you just need to show up differently, right? And Running Man was a really good example. We saw the main character turn up with Jordan the Stallion, who is a big TikToker, right? And they did this really funny thing, which took Jordan's content and kind of made it its own, but also talked about the movie, which was a very smart way of doing things. And then recently I saw Jeff Goldblum turn up with these vocalists, and he was singing Popular with this kind of, but it was, it's promoting the film, but it's turning up in a way that's entertaining me and it's exciting. I'm not skipping because I want to see what it's about. But if they served me the Wicked trailer, I probably would have swiped on. Like that's how you get to people in these kind of targeted niches, because you have to work out who is dominant in those niches and how you work your way into their content and look indistinguishable from other TikTok content. Now that's a tall order, right? That is a very tall order for a marketing department, because they now need to spend 10 times as much on production and 1/10 on actual push of those things, because you get a lot of that organic audience. And so because of all of that, we are now in a situation where a personal brand, somebody who is showing up every single day and talking about a subject and entertaining people in another way, is way more powerful, or certainly has easier access to that than the big traditional film companies. Certainly, like I say, if somebody wanted to hire me to do what I'm doing for them, it's going to cost them more than what they would pay somebody to just come up and be a social media person, right? But that's the differentiator in like somebody just doing that and somebody doing it in a kind of an effective way. And so they're going to struggle to pivot on that. So sorry, that was very long-winded. We had to go through the history of marketing to understand this answer. But over the next 10 years, I think what happens is creators start to build their own, and there are already creators who are doing amazing things, right? Blake Ridder is someone I talk about a lot. He's built a million person following across his socials by making indie film content. That's the kind of person who's really set up to capitalize on this. And people who are building their brand now, like I'm very, very much in the early stages of building mine, but that's the kind of space where positioning yourself in this world can not only make you valuable from, it can bring you opportunities, and it can introduce you to amazing people, and it can potentially make a side hustle income as well. But there will come a time in the future where a film picks its director, its DOP, its writer, its entire cast based off of their social media following, because in order to reach the most amount of people in a targeted way, that is the way that you do it. And we can look at that and think, oh, well, the industry is just going to, yeah, it probably will. But you know what else will happen is the teams will work that out themselves, and they'll go, if we collab and we make a film, we can fund it through our audience. We can go out to our audience and say, I'm going to make this thing. The combination of all of those different fan groups will bring in the capital to make the film, and then they will split the back end and hopefully own the distribution in a meaningful way. And so I think that is what is going to cause an indie boom. And I mean across all things, right? Film, across television. I think we're going to start to see the degradation of like how we actually categorize TV and film, and like all of those things are going to become a little bit less meaningless, but it's all going to become a little bit more indie, and I'm up for that.
It's really interesting. And I suppose you'd seen this even with like comics at the Edinburgh Fringe. So up in Scotland, like a lot, you know, at the Fringe now, there's so many more people that they've built an audience on TikTok, and now they've skipped doing the circuit. And as you were saying on the collaboration thing, a lot of them now get together and they join forces, and it brings in, because they've got their own brand and come together. It was really interesting. What does this mean for me as a script editor in conventional TV, Hutch? What should I be doing?
Okay, that's a good question. I guess here I want to caveat that I speak a lot about this on TikTok, right? And there's no simple solution to all of this. There's nothing that anybody can do in their immediate short term to be like, I'm just going to do this and this is going to fix my career, right? But what I think is apparent is that more of an audience doesn't hurt your career. There are some edge cases about actors, and I'm not totally sure that I believe all of the edge cases, but having more of an audience around what you do is a powerful thing. It gives you access to new people. It gives you access to opportunities. It gives you access to do the most powerful thing, right? The most powerful thing that any creative can do is say, now I'm able to do everything that I wanted to do without the input of Hollywood, without having to ask permission from anybody else. That's when people flippantly say green light yourself, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about a 5-year build on social that kind of puts you in a position where you could reasonably fund a project. Now, nobody wants to hear 5 years as a time horizon, right? But I think what you're doing specifically, Jamie, is brilliant. I think and I also kind of want to talk here about there being this kind of inverse triangle of usefulness, right? And I find this, right? I talk to my community a lot about the complexities of monetization, about digital marketing, about finding, profitable ROI loops to grow your project. And that's way too advanced for TikTok. Like nobody cares about that stuff on TikTok. On TikTok, I have to dumb myself down to be speaking in very broad terms. And then, whenever I try and get into the nuance on a topic, somebody's calling me out, be like, well, that's not what it's like in America. And I'm like, yeah, I know. So that you are the most useful to the most number of people before you've even entered the film industry or the TV industry. When you're like, I'm going to work out how I would get into the film industry, that's really useful because there are loads of people who want to know that bit of information. Whereas before, 2015, in order to have your information spread, like, to be on a podcast, right? To be invited onto a podcast in 2015, you had to be the expert at the top of that field. And podcasts were kind of interesting because, like, you kind of got a view into like what was going on at the very elite stages of whatever. But, I find this with a load of Stephen Bartlett's content, right? He's talking about like, oh, you've got to focus on these 1% and you've got to do, and like, yeah, you do when you've done 10 years of podcasting to focus at this top end. But like most people don't need that information. They need like, what are the 3 things that are going to make the biggest impact to my career? So
Completely.
let me take your question with that view in mind. What are the 3 things that you can do? You can be visible about what you're doing on social media. You can be smart about data cap. This is a nerdy one, and I'm sorry. Just bear with me for 2 minutes. But like, if you build an audience on YouTube and you want to tell everybody who follows you on YouTube that you've got a new film out, you have to pay YouTube to do that. You have to do it through ads. You have to target. It costs you as a CPM, right? And the bigger that audience gets, the more you have to pay. And it makes launching something really, really expensive. So think about this. And I have a couple of products that I use in this tree, but like think about how you can communicate with people by capturing their email address for some value, right? This is in digital creator space. This is like, it's called a lead magnet. It's a very tried and tested method. But like if you are a director of photography, here are 3 lighting setups that are going to change your world. It's a PDF. It's free. Come and download it, right? And what that does is it starts bringing you a list of people who care about what you're doing. And when I'm talking to my indie film community about this, I'm talking about like charge for your film, first of all, because making content on social media makes your film more valuable than it being on YouTube. Charge for your social media. When people pay for your social media, you get their email address. And when you're doing your next crowdfund, message them. They watched your last film. They will care about your next film. They care more deeply than the vast majority of people. And for free, you can tell them about the next thing. So data capture is something that it's not the first thing you need to do in social media, right? But it's very quickly the second thing. And the third thing is, I think just get used to the idea that you need to be the driving force in your career. Like, it's not that people don't want to help you. It's not that there aren't amazing people peppered through the film and TV industry. You know, I have been lucky enough to meet some amazing mentors and people that I consider having helped me. Not once have they ever gotten me a job or have they ever done anything in any meaningful way to progress my career. That is all on me. And I know that it's all on me. And most of the time, the reason they can't do that is because there are 10 people for every job in the film industry at the moment and the TV industry. There is a literal ton of talent that is just not able to get in, not because they're not qualified, not because they're not talented, not because they don't have the track record, just because there aren't enough jobs. And like I say, I hope over the next 5 years, we see a rebalancing where this indie film market learns how to monetize sub $1 million films and the respective TV formats that sit within that. And when they do, that can increase that number of jobs, and we become this kind of much less snobby, blended community of creatives. I would love that. But yeah, I think those are the three things.
Let's quickly recap them then. So the first is just
Build an audience.
Building an audience by being present online in whatever niche you are in. So whatever suits what you're sort of trying to say. Second, data capture. So basically having access to people's emails or ways of like distributing information when you're trying to market something. And thirdly, what was the third one again? Just to
The third one was understand that you need to be the driving force.
Yeah, driving force of your own career. It's all really interesting stuff. Again, you're saying loads of things and it feels more complicated than it is, I think, a lot of this stuff, because it's new. I think that's why, and I think this is, to go back to what I said earlier, this is why the conventional industry sometimes struggles to keep up with this. Because imagine being a big bureaucratic block like the BBC I work for and trying to like adapt to a new time. It's really hard, and I think most people are trying their best. It's not a deliberate like snubbing. It's like a systemic thing that, will change gradually over time as well.
And firstly, it takes time for this information to disseminate, right? Like, I was very lucky in the sense that the company I was working for was a tech, like, startup company, right? We had people in there who had come from growth hacking, Silicon Valley startups, and they were like, no, this is how you do it. And so being around those kinds of people, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, how do you apply that to entertainment? How would I apply that to my film that I want to make? And that those people have not yet gotten to the BBC, right? The BBC, through no fault of its own, is just kind of like, it has lots of progression ladders where people are kind of in jobs that they're expected, they're wanting to be the next step up. And so bringing somebody in from like a tech company into the BBC, not only do you mess with the progression ladder in that department, but you also like bring in quite radical ideas. And, somebody who I think of very highly in the industry, I mentioned, maybe I should try and go to the BBC, and they were like, don't do it. Dude, your brain does not work in the BBC. Like, you need space to run. You need to be able to control this. And like, you don't need meeting after meeting about a meeting and the kind of bureaucratic red tape that lives there. So I took that quite seriously. But yeah, it's not that, I don't think it's that the TV channels are mismanaged or are trying to do any of this. I just think they sit in this space where they're just not, they can't take advantage of it. Not like independent filmmakers can, not like you can. Like, you can set up your own podcast, you can put content out, you can build an audience in a way that if the BBC wanted to do this, it suddenly becomes really expensive. Like, just imagine how much somebody would need to pay you to do exactly what you do for yourself, right? It would probably be quite expensive. It's way more expensive than you doing it for yourself, but you get the benefits of all of those things and all of those connections that you make and all of this information as well. Like, that's the core of all of this.
Yeah. And it is a mad one, because I've been doing this for 5 years and I have yet to make any real income from this. I'm investing a lot of time and a lot of money into it, which I hope will pay off. And it has paid off on a personal level, an opportunity level. No, completely. I know what you mean. 100%. A question, there might be some of my listeners listen to this going, I'm quite introverted. It's not really my thing. I don't want to be posting stuff online, but I do want to be a filmmaker or have a creative career and stuff. I suppose 2 questions for this is, what would you say to those people? And secondly, like, what if everyone does this? Will it not become oversaturated, or does that not matter because we're operating in such niche groups anyway?
Well, so let me start with the first bit. If you're an introvert, firstly, there are a ton of different ways that you can make content that doesn't, like, everybody's introverted in their own specific way, right? Some people feel strange about talking about themselves. And so it's very possible, like just shifting your focus away from yourself and onto your project is a really good way that I've seen introverts do that. The second way is that, like, I don't want to be on camera. Fine. There are, again, loads of different ways that you can create content that is not you talking to camera. Like, if you look at my content, it's all me talking to camera because A, I'm fine with it. I don't, it's not, I don't love it, but I'll deal with it. And secondly, it's the only way that I can produce 4 videos a day is just by pointing my camera at my face and recording, right? And that isn't a level that you need to keep up for any other reason than that's the speed I want to grow. But yeah, there are loads of different ways around that. You can still create content. You can still work out exactly what's right for you. Just, scroll through TikTok until you find something that's like, oh, this is a really good idea, and then steal it. Like that's the, somebody's done like, it's text overlaid, but it's a video of a rainy day. Cool. Do that. Like that will still get you 90% of the way there, 80% of the way there. That you get some slight longer term benefits from doing like face to camera video because you build yourself as a subject matter expert and people recognize you when you come up in their feed in the same way that like people recognize Stephen Bartlett, right? So when they see him come up in their feed, they're like, oh, I know that, I will listen to this because I've previously liked that information. But you don't need to do that. There's loads of different ways to do it. And like I say, just posting, just doing stuff is 80% of the work, 90% of the work if you're smart about it. And then, once you've started doing the consistency, then think about like, okay, how could I make these posts perform a little bit better? And mostly that's about like a good hook. But by the time you're there, by the time you're thinking about what the hook of your video is, you are 99% of the way to being a proper full-time content creator. Like that's all that you need to go through. So that's one thing I would say. The next thing I would say is like, look for, and this is a shameless plug, look for communities of people who are building audiences themselves. One thing I am very keen on with the Film Insider community, which is the little community that I run, is that everybody who's doing stuff in there has access to my audience. So I'm constantly reposting. I mean, I do it with people outside of it as well. Anybody who's doing amazing things in the British indie space, I am trying to repost. I'm trying to stitch. I want more. I don't see enough of it. I want more of that stuff to be out there because I think the best outcome for everybody is when there is a big swell in indie space, right? This isn't just me being like, I want to build my audience to do what I want and make my projects. Like, I think if we all do this together, we can find a way to actually like bring about a real indie revolution. The last question was saturation. There probably is a point in the future where there is saturation, but we are so far from that, mostly because we as individual people are niches, right? I have definitely come up on somebody's timeline and they've seen me and they've been like, this guy is not for me, right? And they've on. Definitely that has happened because I am a niche in some ways, right? You have to like I don't particularly like the tough love kind of thing. I've been doing a little bit more of that, but like I'm not trying to be argumentative. I'm trying to be very supportive. I'm trying to be very like open about stuff. And that's just not some people's vibe for the content that they want to watch. But there will be somebody who comes along and does that, who has had similar experience to me and is doing something similar. Like we can all exist in a very nicely put together way, I think, because we become the niches. So that we would have to get so far along this timeline for there to be actual.
No, it's an interesting one about the saturation as well. You made a video that's really stuck out to me the other day when you were talking about how you'd had a viral video, which had had like 100,000 views or whatever, but it had actually done more damage to you in some ways because you just need to land those, 3 to 500 views of people that will actually engage in your community and are your niche. But because it's like TikTok's pushed you out to more people, then the algorithm gets confused by that and you don't end up showing up to the people you need to. I think that is really interesting.
Yeah. And this again is like the thing that I'm trying to deliver to people is, yeah, there's some industry and production information across my content, right? I can't help but do that because it's my core knowledge base. But most of what I'm talking about is indie filmmakers understanding monetization, building their own audience, and growing for themselves as like a proper little business. And most of that needs to be like social media strategy and monetization strategy and platform strategy. And so I really do try to share everything that I am going through and learning with TikTok specifically. But the core thing I think here is that like there are 2 different types of content creator. right? There's a content creator that survives on views, right? And you know them because they do skits and they do dances and they do that kind of stuff. They are not trying to get anybody to do anything other than watch their content. And that is a very, very different game to being a niche content creator. Like if you've got a podcast like you have, if you've got a film that's coming out, if you're somebody who is monetizing their knowledge, like you don't need that big audience. And actually it's detrimental a lot of the time if you get that big audience. And the video that you're talking about, I was just doing a little skit about like I had this experience myself where I was working with this American team, and one of them turned around to me and they went like, "Oh, I love British TV." And I was like, "Oh yeah, like, Great British Bake Off and whatever." And they were like, "No, Keeping Up Appearances." And I was like, how did you see Keeping Up Appearances? Like that's niche in the UK. And so I made that into a funny video, and it did 300,000 views. And as soon as it does that, TikTok goes, "Oh, this is the kind of person that likes this person's content." And then it starts serving them videos of me ranting about distribution platforms and why YouTube is so bad for creators. And like the people who watched the funny skit video see that and they're like, "I don't want to watch this." And so then TikTok goes, "Well, he's not performing very well, so we'll stop pushing him out." So yeah, there are just like, I think the realities of being a content creator, I don't see that talked about a lot. And so certainly for film and TV people, I like to give them a little insight into like, I actually don't want to go viral. Going viral has it's been good for me on one occasion, but that was because I went viral about talking about the community, which was incredible. But most of the time, if I'm going viral, it's the wrong audience and it's going to destroy my figures in TikTok.
I mean, that's really useful for people to hear though. And I think it does help you like sort of revalue what you're doing yourself. Because for me, I was like, why am I chasing views on TikTok? Ideally what I want to do is give people value and help people learn about the creative industries, and then also like people go, "Oh, I'll check out Just Got a Real Job podcast because if Jamie's doing that here, then that's what his podcast will be doing," and you get listeners for that. And yeah, it's a strange one.
And this is the other thing. I made a video about this today. I don't know if I've posted it yet, but like the reason most people give up is because they don't see growth in line with their expectations. And I talk about like Instagram specifically, right? If you look at how many videos I've posted, which is just over 1,000, and I've got about 17,500 followers, you'd go, okay, so for every video he's posting, he gets like, 17.5 followers. And actually that's not the case, because one of the videos that I put out got me like 7,000 followers, and like 3 videos probably got me 7,000 followers as well, right? So you just have to make a lot of content, because you're taking shots at this, you're taking shots at a target, and most of the time you're going to hit around the outside of the target, but sometimes you get something near the middle and you're like, ooh, here's a boost. But you have to be in your core competency, because when it does go viral, you need it to be your voice. It needs to be representative of the content that you make. So if you start like shifting outside of that, it's not great. There will be stuff that is more likely to go viral in the stuff when you shift outside of your content, your core content, but that's not useful views. And actually, the thing that I can really tell you now is that I'm probably 8 months into my social media journey. And bear in mind, I've been doing this for years for other people's accounts and for companies, but on Hutch.on.Film, like I've been doing this at 8 months now, and I'm just starting to see a little bit of a bite in traction, because people have seen my face every day. Like I've done 4 videos a day for 8 months. Because they're seeing my face, they start to know what I'm talking about. They'll just watch a little bit longer. And then that gives me a little bit more of an algorithmic boost. And then they'll watch a little bit longer the next one, right? And there's this kind of snowballing effect that it took 6 months to even see the grassroots of it. It was like 200 views a video for 6 months. But still in that time, even with 200 views a video, I built, 300 people have joined the insider community, and like I think 1,000 people have bought my other digital products that I've got there as well. So there is a real tangible way within 6 to 12 months of being up and running, in not in a way that's going to change your life, but in a way that establishes you as a subject matter expert and brings in at least enough additional income to warrant doing it. But I see a lot of people focus on the content side, right? They're focused on, I've got to do another episode. I've got to do episode after episode after episode. And actually just shifting that focus of like, yeah, another episode is really useful, but shift to the front end, just tweak content here, make sure the hook is good, kind of set up something that's a little bit more conducive to views, and you'll kind of get this rebalancing, because then you're increasing the value of each of those episodes that then comes after it, rather than just like lots of content out. But the beauty of a podcast, for anybody who wants to do a podcast specifically, is that you do an hour's conversation and then you get like 2, 3, 4 weeks worth of postable content.
Yeah, that's true, and it's something I'm trying to learn. I've done 182 episodes of this podcast that I published, probably record more than that. But do you know what I mean? If I go back, I can you can repurpose stuff 2 years later, and it still so there's definitely value there.
And
There's
not just there's loads of different ways to repurpose it as well. Like I had a video that did very well on Instagram probably 6 months ago, and it was that video that I told you about, right? The one that brought me in 7,000 followers, and I reposted it yesterday. I just uploaded that same video again, and it's done 20,000 views, so well above average. So, and even that's brought more people in. So you now have a kind of rolling bank of content that you can dip into. You can know what your greatest hits are, right? You're telling the particular joke that the audience wants to hear. You're playing your number one smash on stage, right? You're re-engaging your audience with something that they recognize.
Yeah, and one of the best things about podcasting as well is speaking earlier about you get to enter other people's communities because you have a different guest on every week, so you then speak to their audience, which comes with pros and cons because you can sometimes it can be too broad where you're confusing the algorithm and because you're jumping between niches and audiences, but there's definitely lots of positives there. So I'll be pushing your face out lots, Hutch, after this episode goes out. So, I mean, there's so much more I can ask you. We'll definitely get you back on the podcast, Hutch. I suppose one question I've maybe not asked, I probably haven't gone into enough detail about some of the stuff you offer, but there's links in the show notes for people to check out. But running social media account all the time and posting all this stuff every day, obviously there's negatives to that as well, because if you're constantly online, it's not good for your brain. So how have you found that? Are you able to switch off when you make content? Are you able to go, I'm going to go away and do other things?
Yeah. So the way that and this is something I've developed over time, right? This wasn't beforehand. I was literally recording and posting. And certainly in the early days, that was useful because I could iterate very quickly based on the comments that I was getting, right? I could kind of work out what people wanted to know and I could answer questions. What I have found out since is that the videos that do best sit around a couple of key topics. They sit around indie film being an amazing opportunity. They sit around the reasons that Hollywood is failing at marketing, or, these big projects, we're starting to see a lot of negative news around them. There's a couple of core things that I need to make content around. And so now each morning I will sit in my chair in the kitchen, and I will just come up with 4 ideas that sit around this, and I will just speak to the camera. And I know that the format of my videos is always hook at the beginning, where I need to just say something that is going to get somebody to listen. I've then got a little intro that I do, which talks about the Film Insider community, so that people get that in their mind, that that's kind of like my main product. And then I give the body a little response to the hook that I was doing, and then a call to action at the end. That's sort of I experiment around that, but mostly that's what I do. And I will just sit, and one after the other, I will record 4 videos that are less than 3 minutes, but more than 1 minute, and I'll queue them up. And that takes me 35 minutes now in a day. And I do spend some time checking numbers and looking at comments. I try to use those as inspiration and respond to the ones that I can. But mostly that's all of the social media that I do. Like in my personal life, I will do some scrolling in the evening, like when I'm bored of the TV show that I'm watching. But I consider that 30 minutes or so is by this. I'll normally get bored of social media by then. I don't think I'm under the spell of the algorithm so much anymore. But I'm nearly 40, so it's not super targeted at me necessarily. But yeah, that's kind of
I'm so
I try and
constantly checking it.
Yeah. You that I think is something that you definitely, if you find yourself doing that, you need to push away from it, because that is an indication that your brain is like, oh, I want the viral thing. I want the viral thing because I want to suddenly see loads of views. And then, maybe you get 8 months into this and you're like, actually, every time I've gone viral, it has sucked. And I don't want to go viral. I want my consistent views. And then you can just check in once a day and you're like, all right, yeah, I'm getting my normal views. Like, oh, that video did well. Like, I'll do another one of those. Or that video didn't do well. I'll probably stop. I'll take that out of my content rotation. But yeah, if you're hoping for the big boom, the big viral stuff, it's a difficult space to be. Try and avoid it, because that's not what you want. You want the small iterative growth.
Yeah, no, 100%. Hutch, thank you very much for your time today. Honestly, it's so fun to chat to you. Like, I'm loving the content you're making, and thanks. I think this is an interesting episode. It's very different to what some of the conversations I've had before. People might be listening to this. Oh my God, there's so many new ideas that have been presented, but it's useful to have these conversations. No, in a good way. I think it's useful to have these conversations to get a different perspective on TV and film industry. So thank you for your time today.
And like for anybody that's listening, go and follow me on social media, because there's just this constant flow of this kind of stuff. I'm trying to stick in those content buckets so that people understand these concepts in a lot more nuance. And then if you're like, oh, I just need to ask Hutch a question, the Film Insider community, the link is in my bio. That's where we speak weekly. Every week we jump in on a Friday and we do a voice session where we talk about things that are going on in the industry and people ask questions. But I'm just always there to like answer questions of people if they haven't.
And it's really exciting. There's links to everything that Hutch is doing in the show notes as well. Thank you for your time. Lovely to meet you.
Thank you, buddy.
Great.
Just get a real job.